Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. About a month ago, we had the final balance patch of 2025, and as always, there were a number of videos summarizing and making predictions about how the changes would impact each civilization. I thought for this video it'd be fun to do a follow-up and see how my predictions and others have aged. We have about a month of ranked data now on the new patch, and we can see have Turks ended up being broken on Arena, are Spanish conquistadors dominating, and if the Shu have finally been knocked out of the top tier. We'll recap the changes and check some hot fresh stats to see what impact it's all had. The first general change in the December patch was a slight lowering of the Eagle's food cost. This one's a little tricky to gauge, as there may be more than one factor at work, but notably all three American civs have seen a jump in their ranking on the most recent patch after that change, with no other balance tweaks affecting any of these civilizations directly. Mayans had seemingly the most dramatic improvement, from ranking 40th to 26th across all Eloan maps, though we do have to be careful not to read too much into what might just be random noise or simply a new map pool that subtly favors these civs a bit more. Now that we know there's a South American themed civilization right around the corner, the American civs are certainly eating well lately. Moving on to specific civilizations, the first is the Armenians, who had their warrior priest cost drop by 10 gold. It doesn't sound like much, but it's a pretty good unit, and gaining map control with it early to grab relics has the potential for a bit of a snowball. We actually see a pretty significant jump in win rate and ranking for the Armenians this patch. Keep in mind, Gambazins was also buffed as a general change, so that could theoretically be helping a good swordsman line civ like Armenians here too. It's probably too early to look at specific maps in the data with total confidence, but Arena is so far looking pretty good for them. Notably, they were not in the top tier for Arena in the previous patch, whereas they're now number 2 in performance so far. Keep in mind, this is the map we'd expect the Warrior Priest to be doing its best work, and whether or not it's completely down to the Warrior Priest, Armenians look to have benefited quite a bit from the December patch. Next up for Bulgarians, they can now train Tatars from their Krepos. They were number 3 overall, and are actually now up to number 2, which is entirely due to their great men-at-arms opening at low elo, and nothing, I suspect, to do with this change. Maybe I've just overlooked the slew of Bulgarian Petard rushes happening this last month, but either way, Bulgarians as a top civ feels like it's kind of come out of nowhere the last year, and is a nice shakeup to the usual suspects that traditionally have had the highest win rates, like for example Huns. Moving on to the Burgundians, they had a small Flemish militia speed increase, which I suspected would have little to no impact in the stats. The win rate is subsequently up a tiny bit, though it's probably just noise. Interestingly, their early game is still suffering a lot, with you can see an especially poor win rate in shorter games. I'm still not entirely sure if the devs want Flemish militia to become a standard unit for the civ in Feudal and Castle Age, or if it's supposed to be primarily used for Flemish Revolution and Imperial, and just given access to it earlier for the fun of it. If they wanted to buff Burgundians early game and see that unit in particular more often, we'll probably see another change to Flemish militia in not too long. Next up, we have the Georgians, who really doubled down on some existing strengths, improving their tech, allowing for mounted units to take up less pop space in the late game, as well as their fortified churches having a bit more reach. An 8 to 9 tile increase in that building does translate into a surprisingly large area increase, so it feels like it could be fairly helpful on the edge cases, quite literally. As far as the stats go, things are basically the exact same for Georgians, who still rank in the lowest tier, as they have been for actually quite a long time. Even doing the breakdown in win rate by game length, it's functionally identical from the last patch to this one, with the civ obviously struggling in the mid game and already being fine late, though seemingly unaffected by the changes there as well. Personally, I'm not really surprised there's been little to no effect, and I wouldn't be shocked by another Georgian buff at some point, especially as the perception starts to catch up with the reality that they've been a bottom tier civ on the ladder since their healing rate nerf. That said, the potential of their late game is so strong I can see why the devs are careful of buffing their early game too much, or they might go right back to the top tier. Moving on to the Jurchens, they were already doing fine, and yet received 2 buffs for their cavalry, between faster Iron Pagoda attack speed and an improvement to their cavalry and Fire Lancer attack speed bonus. AoE stats, which I reference most often, still isn't tracking the Jurchen win rates properly, unfortunately, but a similar site called AoE Pulse has them going up about 1% on Arabia after this change. For civs with Step Lancers plus a cavalry unique unit, it often feels like players just default to the Step Lancer, and I think that's happening with Jurchens, having some of the better Step Lancers, or arguably even the best at some points of the game. Either way, in terms of win rate at least, Jurchens seem well balanced at the moment, while subjectively I think being interesting to play as well. Next up for the Khitans, they had a nerf making passers more expensive to start up, offset by some improvements to the mounted trebuchet. Again, going off AoEPulse.com, their Arabia win rate is down about a percentage since then, which is enough to drop them from number 1 to now number 2 on that map behind Bulgarians, at least if we include all ELO ratings, and they're still number 1 if we look at just 1200 plus ELO. They're clearly a great civ on open maps, but you can see the devs trying to nudge them down just a bit, and the tweak to their pastures seem to have had the desired effect. I wouldn't be shocked at all to see pastures go up to 120 wood eventually, if for no other reason than just to end up with the same cost per villager as farms at 60 wood each. Next up for the Persians, their unique tech for crossbows to only cost wood made those crossbows 10 wood cheaper than before. Despite maybe sounding good on paper, I suspected this wouldn't have much impact, as wood is so rarely the bottleneck for Persians in the late game. Plus, remember, they're missing bracer, so the crossbows don't end up being amazing. As it turns out, so far it's almost impossible to notice a difference in Persian win rates overall, or even on a more granular breakdown by game length. Note the y-axes aren't quite at the same scale here, but the overall profile of the civ is almost unchanged, as I think most players would have expected. Don't get me wrong, the unique tech can be quite good, and the combo of crossbows with Savar is a lot of fun, but those wood savings at the stage of the game the unique tech comes in just doesn't feel like the sort of thing that would change a loss into a victory, at least to the extent of overcoming random noise in the data. Moving on, we have maybe the biggest loser in the patch with the shoe, who had a seemingly innocuous change to their lumberjack food bonus, dropping from 9% to 7%. It sounds like almost nothing, and in terms of win rate over game length, it's hard to tell if the before and after are different until you notice the y-axis scales. Their peak of winning 65% of 20 to 30 minute long games is now down to just over 55%. Zooming out, the result on their win rate so far has been enormous, going from a top ranking civ by win rate to about average. They're just straight up worse across the board, making this an incredibly effective nerf. I knew it sounded small, but this is the kind of thing that really shows up in the stats, and you just can't underestimate. We saw the same thing with the Hindustanis when their villager discount was tweaked just a little, and those food-related eco bonuses only need tiny changes to have dramatic effects. I should note, she was still doing pretty well at high elo, but for everyone else, it was a very effective nerf to bring them out of the top tier. Next up are the Spanish, who had their elite conquistadors buffed. I love this one on paper, but I didn't expect a big change in the stats, and that's pretty much what we've seen. There are just too many ways for a game to end prior to Elite Conquistador to really see much here, and so far any concerns about it being too strong haven't played out. Had it been the non-Elite Conquistador buffed, we'd see something much more dramatic, but in my opinion the Elite Conquistador was kind of underwhelming previously, and the improvement was justified, with no major impact on the civ. The result is actually very similar to Tatars, who had some sizable buffs to their Keshiks that I know had some players concerned. I definitely think the Keshik is a very good high-value unit at this point, but I still don't think players use it that often, as Tatars just have so many other enticing options. The impact of the change was almost nothing to Tatars' win rate and rank, staying as a fairly middle-of-the-road civ. Going by game length, I'd say likewise there's been little to no impact, with a tiny bump in the late game that's probably just noise. I just don't think players are making the unit often enough to see it impact win rates, though I think it still helps the civ by giving you another solid option besides the usual step lancer or crossbow and a cavalry archer play that they're nicely set up for between their free techs and silk armor. But now for the one that I was really worried about, let's take a look at the Turks, who had their gold miner bonus jump from 20 to 25%. Having just seen how impactful 2% changes to eco bonuses can be, I was definitely concerned about this one, especially its impact on Arena. So let's see how the stats are shaking out for Turks. First, their win rate and ranking are up, not surprisingly, given it's a buff to their main eco bonus. The surprising part is they're not absolutely dominating on Arena like I feared they might. They are still number 1, so they're dominating in that respect, just like before, but are only up from 57 to so far about 57.5% win rate. We'll see what happens as more data comes in, but I was half expecting something over 60%, so I'm glad to see I was wrong about that. This is why patches in game balance are so hard to predict. A 2% drop to an eco bonus sends Shu to the Shadow Realm, while Turks get a 5% bump and hardly notice on their best map, where you'd think they'd benefit the most from it. That's just AoE 2 for you, though maybe also speaks to how much more impactful food bonuses are than gold ones. And finally, the last civ is the Wu, where their Gean swordsman training time increased quite a bit. Looking at win rate over game length with the same y-axis here, they're clearly looking a little worse off in the early to mid game, probably at least a bit from that nerf, though are still doing roughly the same in overall win rate and ranking. The extra food they get from military buildings just always makes them feel solid no matter what you do in the early game, speaking to that impact of food bonuses again. The nerf just looks like a solid balance change to me. It did what it was probably intended to by toning down the spam of that one unit, while still leaving it as a viable counter to all-in archer play. So that's a look at the somewhat preliminary data coming out. The stats suggest the big winners were Armenians, Turks, the American civs, and arguably Jurchens could be in that group, with the biggest loser being the Shu, and to a lesser extent the Khitans and Wu as well. That'll do it for this one though. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you next time.